Sure. So, Michael put this panel together, and I think it's very good. It's not often we have, I think, basically the leading data providers, for the entire country, as well as, what I think is probably the leading tool, at least on the existing building side, together, along with a single architect, which made the Q&A, as I was coming up with questions, kind of difficult. I am not an architect either. But I think that this is going to be a great discussion, and we're going to do some Q&A afterwards that I'll lead, and since this is a small group, really hoping that it will be, very much a conversation. Kelly?
Yes. I should clarify, I'm not an architect. I'm representing architects today. So I'm going to focus on one of the AIA's programs, the AIA 2030 commitment, and just spend a few minutes to really just give an overview of what the program is, why we started it, and what we hope the program brings to our members and to the profession. So the background on the commitment was in December 2005. The AIA board adopted basically what's known as the 2030 challenge, the 2030 targets. They adopted a position statement outlining those reduction goals, and established CBECS, which we'll hear about in much more detail, as the baseline that we would use. For the sake of the AIA 2030 commitment, we actually pull from a few different sources to try to include as many building types as possible. So it is based on CBECS data, as well as information from Labs 21, and we encourage, when we talk about this later, we also encourage that for any project where it's applicable, to get a regional EOI using Target Finder. So one of the things that sort of led us to launching this program was we had established the 2030 challenge, and people knew what it was, knew about it, but they were sort of overwhelmed on how to get there. How do you go from where we are now to saying that we're going to be carbon neutral in 2030? And from the AIA side of it, we were getting, once we hit 2010, we were starting to get the calls of, all right, so how is the industry doing? And we're supposed to meet that first goal of, immediate 50% reduction. So how are the buildings doing? And we realized we sort of needed a way to answer that. So at the next slide, what we basically tried to create with the 2030 commitment was more of a tangible roadmap to help our members that were adopting these targets to take sort of a stepped approach, a grassroots approach of getting there. So the outline of the program is that once you join, you have kind of a framework that you're going after. You're starting with your own operations within your firm, everything from your transportation policies to your recycling policies to waste management, building up to creating a larger sustainability action plan that addresses your firm holistically, and then reports annual progress through a reporting tool that the AIA developed. And when we were putting together the commitment, we were trying to figure out what the AIA's role in this could be. We have rating systems for buildings. We have a way of kind of understanding individual buildings. What was the AIA's role? We didn't want to create something that was duplicative. So we were looking at a list of, we were having a conversation with other well-known sustainable leaders in sustainable design, and we were looking at the ranking that was put out that year of the top 20 or 30 sustainable design firms in the U.S. We realized that the criteria was the number of LEED buildings that they had done, and somebody commented that was on the list, but did you know that that's how many LEED buildings we've done, and it's been enough to put us in the top 20, but that probably only makes up 25% of our portfolio. And that's where we sort of came up with, well, what's happening to the rest of that 75%? So we decided that this program, the way that we would focus on reporting annual progress, was to get our firms to really take a comprehensive look at how every project within their portfolio was doing, and really have the goal of setting an energy target and setting an energy target for every project and active project in design. So where the 2030 commitment stands now as a program, at the next slide, is that we have actually a couple more than that as of this week, but a little over 215 firms total. One of the things that we do like to point out quickly in this slide is that it's not just for our large firms. We've taken sort of great pains to try to make this as approachable and usable as possible when developing this program. And so we do have a number of our small firms that are participating in this program. They make up the large number of our membership. So you can see here that we identify a large firm as being 100 staff or more. So nearly 65% would fall under that, and almost 30% have staffs of under 20. So on the next slide, what I wanted to touch on very quickly, when I said we wanted to develop this to make it as simple and straightforward and approachable as possible, is we tried to limit the amount of data that a firm would have to collect to get a sense of how their portfolio was performing. So I had some fantastic volunteers, many of whom are out of AIA Chicago, help sort of develop this souped up Excel sheet basically to serve as a tool that was embedded with a lot of information, which would require a firm to only provide the data of an internal project identifier, the gross square footage of a project, picking the building occupancy type from a drop-down menu, and then indicating whether or not the project was modeled. And if it was not modeled, we basically took some information that we got from MBI on code equivalent. So if you did not model the project, you could put in the building code that you're using and get a rough equivalent of what kind of reduction you can expect. So what I'm going to highlight with the next slide, we're just going to take a quick look at the second year results, which were just put out at the AIA convention last month. So this will just sort of set up the conversation for later, that this is one of the things to keep in mind is that the results in this, they're only predictive right now. It's projects that are in the design phase. And secondly, these are firms that have voluntarily signed up to do this. So we're already talking about the ones that have this on their radar, that are active enough to put the process in place, and I think when we look at the results, it's going to make for an interesting conversation later. So the projects that are included in this result are any active project that's in the design phase of that calendar year, either new construction or a significant renovation that includes HVAC work. And then we also have, for our firms that do interiors work, we also did track lighting power density to try to help give a target to our firms that do interior work. So the metrics that we're looking at, we'll hear a lot, I'm sure, about energy use intensity. So that's how CBECS has the benchmark through their building types. So we have EUI, but we needed a way to differentiate what we were doing with the 2030 commitment to make sure that people understood that this was just based on predicted performance, predicted energy use. So we have PEUI that we use a lot, predicted energy use intensity, which is what the results in the 2030 commitment are showing, as well as lighting power density, LPD. So the key results from this year that we'll go through in the next slide, we had nearly 104 firms that reported this year, which was an 86% increase from the first year that we had results, where we had results from 56 firms. The data in here represents just over 650 million square feet, and then we'll go through these other results in the slides. We can go ahead and look at these in more detail. So this is representative of the design work in these results from these 104 firms. And one of the reasons that we think that this is significant is when you start to talk about the potential. This is 1 year, 656 million, that's 1 year's worth of potential design work from only 104 firms. And when you look at the fact that, I think we just the profession reached an incredible threshold last year of the number of square footage that was LEED certified, where I think it was we reached 1 billion last year as a profession, which is incredible. But when you look at the fact that in 1 year if we could start to get even incremental changes across our entire bit of design work, the potential impact of the program and of addressing the way that we practice could be significant. So the next slide looks at, so this is kind of the big kind of talking points, which I'm sure will come up later. So here are these firms that are ahead of the curve, and what we have is, on average, where we want to be right now is at a 60% reduction. Collectively, on average, what these firms are reporting is a 35% reduction, on average, for their building types, which is not awful. It's not where we want to be. But then when you start to look at where we want to be is have our entire portfolio at 60%. So the other target here is saying, well, what percentage of our collective portfolio is meeting our current target? And roughly 12%. 12% of the collective projects are meeting the target of where we want to be. And I think that's sort of the out of all of it, kind of the number we want to see obviously go up. And I think that's something as a panel that we'll discuss later on why do we think these numbers are the way that they are. Looking at the next slide, quickly, we also broke down one of the things that the firms report on is what percentage of their total gross square foot is being modeled, and what percentage of their work do they intend, or do they have a process in place for actually collecting actual use data back from the owners. So the percentage being modeled is significant in the fact that what is clear from these, if you look at the code equivalents, if you go through the tool, is that there aren't very many codes that are going to get us even anywhere close to where it is that we want to be. So it is going to take going beyond code. It's going to take modeling, and we're modeling just over half of our work. And in the report, you'll see actually a comment from a practitioner that said that's the equivalent of driving a car blindfolded. If we're not even modeling our work and we don't have an idea of where it is that we're going to be. But what was encouraging was the increase in the percentage of the actual use data that intends to be collected. That actually went up 9% from last year. So it's, I guess, too early to say that it's a trend after 2 years. It could end up being a blip, but if that continues to improve, that's a really positive sign. So kind of the conclusions that we took away from this year are that what was clear from firms is that there are some projects that do really, really well, but we're just not, our members aren't able to connect these energy targets more uniformly across their portfolio. We'd like to see more consistent energy modeling. As I mentioned, the increase in actual energy use data is encouraging. And so our focus as far as supporting the program will be over the next year to create the resources that we're hearing back from our firms, what they need based on their experiences of going through reporting. And probably the big key is, as an institute and even as firms that have joined this, we collectively want to do a better job of demonstrating what the value of this program can provide back to firms. As this program is certainly not meant to be a report just for reporting's sake. What we're trying to do is use this program to actually change the way that our firms are approaching practice and using the data. We're not looking for data and metrics just for metrics' sake, but to learn from it and use it and be able to inform the way that the practice is going, and to help identify the needs of our firms as an institute. That's what we want to do. So just for the last slide before moving on, this was from the foreword of the report, and I think that there are some negative things that could be taken away from looking at, well, our average reduction is 35%, only 12% of our portfolios are meeting it. But but I think it's also important that we realize that it's not necessarily just about what the metrics say, where they say where we are, but it's what are we identifying in those metrics? How is it helping us learn? How is it helping us to improve? What can we learn from these shortcomings to get us to where it is that we want to be? And those are some of the points that we'll be talking about as a panel.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah.
Before we tee up Joelle, are there any quick questions for Kelly?
Yeah, Kelly, what's the baseline for, when you say 35% reduction as compared to what?
The baseline being the 2003 CBECS. So for that particular building type, but the kind of established baseline, whether you're talking about the 2030 challenge or the 2030 commitment, is the 2003 CBECS data.
Any other questions? Yes.
You said there's 216 firms?
Yes.
How many firms are there all in total?
You know, I don't know that offhand, mainly because we don't have firm membership. We have individual members, but I can tell you that represents well under probably about 1% of the total firms that are out there.
Thank you.
Okay, Joelle,
Okay. So
feel free to go to the podium also.
Oh, that's okay. I'm going to be quick, probably. All right, you can go ahead to the first slide. All right, so you've already heard CBECS mentioned a couple times, and you're going to continue to hear it, so I thought I would just tell you a little bit more about the CBECS, give you a little bit of background in case you don't know anything about it. So, and in case anybody missed my introduction, so I'm the survey manager for the CBECS at the Energy Information Administration, which is the independent statistical agency within the Department of Energy. So I'm a statistician, I'm not a green buildings professional or anything, so I come from a little bit different perspective than some of the other panelists here, and for most of you as well. So I know this survey inside and out, but I might not know a lot of other questions. So CBECS, it is the only national level source of data on the characteristics and energy use in commercial buildings. There's not even an existing list of commercial buildings in the U.S., which is what makes our job really, really difficult. But we did, the CBECS, it started back in 1979, and we've done it every 3 or 4 years since then. We're gearing up for what's going to be the 2012 CBECS. So it'll be conducted for, the reference year is right now, and that's going to be the 10th time that the CBECS has been done. So I think a lot of people don't actually quite realize how we even collect the data. We hire interviewers across the country to go out and meet with the building owners, managers, representatives, the person who would be the best knowledgeable person about energy in the building. And they take a laptop computer, which is programmed with a questionnaire. They sit, so the interviewer is not an energy professional either, they're a professional interviewer. They sit down with the building respondent and they ask them questions that last about 30 minutes, because we send them worksheets before the interview too to help them prepare so that they can gather their information. I'm sorry, I'm going to make a point and now I forgot. The sample size has ranged from 5,000 to 7,000 buildings. We're really happy for the 2012 CBECS that it's going to be increased by about 50%, so we're hoping to be able to publish some more granularity in some of our building types and estimates like different subcategories of buildings. The response rate has been historically very good. It's been over 80%. And one of the reasons that we do get such a good response rate is that it is an in-person interview rather than a mail survey, or we go to great lengths to get good response and good quality data. The interview itself, it covers a real wide range of topics, from the structural characteristics of the building to the occupancy of the building to all the technical energy equipment in the building. And that's the point I was going to make earlier, is that that's what having not an energy professional conducting the interview and just having a professional interviewer, it's what makes designing our questionnaire so difficult. We have to find the right balance between technical questions that a lot of our users of our data would like us to ask and what people can actually answer. without having an energy auditor going out and doing the survey. So we'll be going into the field in April, in about a year, a little less than a year from now, to start collecting the data. We go after the reference year so that we can collect the energy data for that reference year. Okay, next slide, please. So then after we collect the data, we publish it on our website. We compile some tables. We tabulate the data. We do some special reports. We also make all of our raw data available for the people that really want to use it in detail, like you all and everybody, Energy Star, and everybody that really uses the data intensely. This is an example of one of our published tables. So the numbers that I've highlighted here are the EUIs. This would be similar to what would be compared against by many different organizations. Okay, go ahead. Another thing, by having such a long history of data, we can provide some trend information. This is just an example that shows that from 1979 to 2003, it started out that we used to use more natural gas in buildings than electricity, and it's grown. So by the 2003 CBECS, we were showing that electricity totals were higher than natural gas totals. And then go to the next slide. But the electricity intensities, though, have stayed flat. So whereas the natural gas intensities have gone down, electricity stayed flat. Basically, any efficiencies that we may have gained from better air conditioning or better efficiencies in equipment have been swamped by all the electricity end uses in buildings. So just plugging in a lot more things. So these are I just wanted to give an idea of some of the types of trends that we can show from the CBECS data. All right, go ahead. One thing that CBECS is limited, though, in what it can tell is comparing one building in our data set to another, or a group, even a group of buildings. A lower energy intensity really doesn't necessarily mean that a building is more energy efficient, because there's just so many other variables. There's too many other things going on in the building. You can't necessarily use that to compare. So when people try to use the CBECS data to demonstrate energy efficiency, it's not necessarily the best. It's designed to provide a snapshot of what's going on in the commercial building stock in a given year. It's good for benchmarking. It's good for making comparisons, but it's not really great for demonstrating energy efficiency. But the one thing that we really can do well is we can capture the prevalence of energy efficiency technologies in buildings. We can see what's going on in the stock and see how that changes over the years. And so the next slide just gives one example of this. In the lighting, we have shown over the years that compact fluorescent use is going up and incandescent is going down, as you would expect. And then we added, for the 2007 CBECS, we added LEDs as a lighting type, and it'll be interesting to see how those numbers grow as the years go on. I think for the 2012, we might be adding induction lighting as a new type. But there's many different energy efficiency features that you could look at and see how they've grown over the years in the CBECS data. We're going to begin including even more questions in the 2012 CBECS about features related to energy efficiency. These are just some examples. There's been a lot of interest in what the buildings are used for as far as getting at the levels of intensity, the amount of floor space that's used for food service and data centers and trading floors. And you can actually go ahead and go to the next slide. We're going to ask about whether buildings are certified Energy Star or LEED, Green Globes, or other. The third bullet here, we for the first time ever in the 2007 CBECS, we started collecting water data. And this is something that we've been, we weren't sure what to expect. It was the first time we had ever tried to collect water data. It's an energy survey. We'd never tried to collect water. And it really, we were very pleasantly surprised by how well it worked. So we're going to continue doing that. And we're also going to be doing a subsample of about 200 of our buildings using an energy audit to verify, to do a comparison of the data and the cost and see if we can, some of these technical items that people would like us to capture, see if it could be done in an energy audit and just do some trade-offs. So it's another part of the 2012 CBECS that we're very excited about. And that is all I was going to say. So yes.
Joelle, question? Can you introduce yourself also?
Oh, I'm Peter Hathaway with General Architects. I was interested in what information you get from the person you interviewed. Do you get a whole year's worth, or just 1 month's worth, or 1 day? You said it's a snapshot.
Right. Thank you. It is. We get annual data, so it's a snapshot of a year of. But that is a good point too. So we collect the energy data. We try to collect the energy data directly from the building respondent at the time of the interview, because it's really important to make sure that the data that we're getting corresponds to the characteristics of the building that we're collecting. You don't want to say that the building's 1,000 square feet and collect energy data for 6,000 square feet, for example. We used to always collect our energy data from the suppliers, and it was hard to match up what the characteristics with the energy consumption. So we try to get it from the building respondent. If they can't give it to us, or if it fails, we have some very sophisticated edits built in. So if it's not what we would expect based on what they've told us, then we go to the energy supplier. We also have, so, and that's another important point too. The CBECS building survey is a voluntary survey, and we still get an 80% response rate. We have mandatory authority with the suppliers. So you can say you have to give us the energy data in the buildings.
Question?
Yes.
Yeah, fundamental question and then a curiosity. The fundamental question is, when you show graphed consumption, that is total consumption, all buildings surveyed, right?
Yes.
And intensity would be that data divided by the number of buildings?
Square footage.
By square footage?
Yes.
Okay, it's an intensity per square foot.
Yeah, it's energy used
Then
per
my,
square foot.
okay, then my curiosity is, how many, do you trying to collect data from the same buildings as formerly surveyed? Do you have any connection between new
No.
data versus, or connected to?
No, it's not a longitudinal. It's not a longitudinal survey. We're not going back to the same buildings and trying to measure change.
Okay.
Although that's something that has been considered and could be done. It may be done in the future. We had the National Academies do some recommendations for us, and that was one of them. So it's possible that we could do that.
Question, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, I'm Jason Kasper from CGF Architects. The last I heard was that the publication of the 2007 CBECS data had been either canceled or indefinitely postponed. Could you speak a little bit to that and any hopes we might have for future information that's more up to date than 2003,
Right.
but not quite for the 2012?
Right. So the 2007, we tried an experimental method of updating our buildings frame, and it's a long story short, there were some mistakes that were made and it didn't work right, and we decided the public was better served by not releasing data that we knew was seriously flawed. That said, we are hoping to publish some data on large hospitals. I know that's probably not real exciting for this group, but the way our sample frame is put together, we use hospitals from a separate frame than most of our buildings, and they were relatively immune from the problems that befell the other groups. And so we feel confident in those data, but unfortunately, there really isn't anything else that we have for the meantime between now and when the 2012 will come out. But I can tell you we are going to do everything in our power to get that 2012 data out as fast as we can once it's collected. We're starting to get programs set up already and everything to get it processed as quickly as we can, because we know people are waiting for it, so.
So if there are any doctors in the audience, you'll have great new data.
Yeah, anybody designing hospitals, maybe, and we're also hoping to release some water data associated with the hospitals too, which is not, you can't find water data anywhere. There's no water data available, so we're kind of excited about that, but it's not the broad spectrum of buildings that everybody would like to see. So I'm really sorry, and I wish I had better news.
Thank you, Joelle. In the interest of time, let's move on to Karen at EPA Energy Star.
And I'm going to go to the podium because I need to stand up. It's the end of the day. We've all worked, so I'm going to stand up and wake you guys up. So I take it that most of you are architects, and we have 10 minutes to do this. So I'm going to read my presentation for the first time. So next slide.
It's gonna be like
All right, it wouldn't let me put any music to it, but
We're imagining the Star Wars.
I know. We could have all owned something. We would
Exactly.
have been queued up.
next slide. This is EPA's 20th anniversary for the Energy Star program. And our administrator was very excited to be part of the celebration or the Partner of the Year dinner. And she made a comment and said 20 years ago, EPA created this unique partnership that put the forces of the market behind energy efficiency and healthier environments for all Americans. And then this meeting that she's having now, she was meeting with some of the stakeholders, some of the CEOs of top companies that were awarded the Energy Star. And one of the CEOs of USAA Real Estate Company noted that more and more tenants are coming to their buildings and asking, are these buildings Energy Star buildings? And what they're finding out is that are they Energy Star certified? And in all indications we're being shown that Energy Star is good for business. So in an economy where things are pretty depressed, when you can save energy in your building, this is a way to save money and also increase the bottom line. So most of our buildings, most of you all know that 50% of the pollution is from our, not pollution, the carbon emissions are from our commercial buildings. And 30% of that energy is wasted energy. So we get, criticism. EPA is under siege right now, if you all haven't been watching the newspaper. But we get criticism that if we, manipulate the market, then there are these entities that can't, do their business and supply energy. 30% of that energy is wasted. And in 2011, with the help of our 20,000 partners in our partnership, Energy Star was responsible for saving 210 metric tons of CO2 emissions through improved energy efficiency and eliminating waste energy. And this represents the equivalent of removing about 41 million cars from the streets. So we've been instrumental in identifying cost-effective, innovative solutions for reducing greenhouse gas emissions since 1992. That's why EPA is in the energy business. Joelle works for the Department of Energy, and they pretty much do the statistics, things like the CBECS data, and we were able to capture that and make it real. So anyway, what we've done, most of you are familiar with it, but what I'm going to talk a bit about here today on the commercial building side of Energy Star. So Energy Star offers standardized metrics, easy-to-use tools for a building life cycle from design to ongoing operations and maintenance. It's the only rating system that uses the same metrics from design through to operations. We don't use the code to figure out what the targets are. The targets are figured out using the same CBECS data that we use for the existing building stock. So the architecture and design firms, they can put the design to earn Energy Star on their products, the Energy Star certifications on the building, and then many of the building owners, they actually use the strategy of determining how they should look at their building portfolio and look at energy strategies using the Energy Star approach. So the way this works is for example, the fuel efficiency sticker on cars show you which ones are efficient cars and then which ones are kind of more gas-hungry cars. EPA has done the same thing by providing a rating system. It does the same thing, showing you the buildings that are more efficient versus the buildings that are less efficient. The higher your score, the lower your energy use intensity is. And it's based on a 1 to 100 scale, which corresponds to the associated EUI, or energy use intensity. And energy use intensity is pretty much based on the function of the building. So therefore, you can put a hospital next to an office, next to a K through 12 school, and look at those in your portfolio for efficiency. But on just raw energy, the hospital is probably going to be much more intensive than the K through 12 school. And then, hey, wait a minute, we're going too fast. Okay, and we use the CBECS data for most of the space types in order to do this. And the unique thing that we've done with the CBECS is that we've normalized the data. So things that are affecting energy use, like size, weather and climate, number of occupants, because the more humans you put in, the more your intensity is going to, your energy use is going to increase typically, unless they're all zombies. But since we're live and we bring out iPods and iThings to plug in, that's going to affect the energy. So the normalization helps to kind of stabilize that. Next. Okay, so the two tools that deploy the rating are Portfolio Manager and Target Finder. Target Finder is used to set design targets or targets for an existing building if you like. You can also do it in Portfolio Manager. And what's nice about Target Finder, it's a standalone tool that you don't have to log in, you don't need a password. You can go in, drop in data, and it's pretty straightforward data: size, number of occupants, how many personal computers, and whether or not how much the building is controlled by or is conditioned by mechanical equipment. And it changes based on the space type a bit. And then Portfolio Manager is the one that uses the energy use the data from your energy bills, and you enter that data into the tool in order to get the rating. Next. And so, next. Okay, next. Okay, right there. Okay, anyway, just don't go. That's good. What it does is Target Finder produces a document, and you can use this document as a bankable document or as a transactional document to show that you either met your requirement to apply for Design to Earn, Energy Star, and submit to EPA. You can also use it for disclosure documentation for some of the state and local ordinances that are there. And you can use it as a reference point for any other type of transaction. And in the design firms, when they're looking at the design, you can run this pretty much whenever you want to. You can set the target, you can do it at schematic, you can do it at DD. It doesn't take very long to do it, and you can use this to document to kind of go around the room and have a discussion point. Next one. And then it's used to promote that these buildings are meeting the EPA criteria for energy efficiency, and it's, the owners find this to be a useful way to ask the architects to design buildings that they know that they can put into place and operate as Energy Star. And so then the next part of that is the completing the cycle is now that the building is up and operating, you can look at it using the Portfolio Manager with your energy bills. And it also prints out, again, another document that you can use for LEED accreditation. And for an example, CoStar lists buildings that are Energy Star. And in order for those to be listed as Energy Star, they have to have the certification as Energy Star. And then you can use it for the LEED Energy, EBOM, LEED Energy and Operation and Maintenance accreditations. And let's see. And then lastly, it's used for the disclosure. It's benchmarking and showing that you meet the disclosure guidelines. Okay. Okay. So Energy Star has been in the forefront, like I said, for the last 20 years. It's being used, the tools and metrics are being used in things like public policy, federal policies. For an example, in the Energy Independence and Security Act, it requires that federal buildings meet new construction targets and benchmark energy use in existing building stock. The Act specifies EPA tools and metrics may be used to document the compliance. So again, those forms that I was showing you earlier are part of what you would put with your documentation to show that compliance. Next. And then this slide, I get to read some CoStar stats that I dug out of my coffer since we have CoStar here. But anyway, it makes good business sense to operate and design energy efficient buildings. When I first started doing design to earn, I had a couple developers come to me and say, we want to make our buildings meet this criteria, because when we go out into the market and look for investors, because they have such a huge portfolio of existing Energy Star buildings, this kind of proves to the market that they can deliver this product, and people want to buy energy efficient buildings. So on average, $1 of energy savings equals about $18 in increased market value. That's pretty good. It's probably better than some of the stock that are in some of the portfolios. And then there's a study done by CoStar. This was maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. But they found that Energy Star buildings represented a $2.40 per square foot premium over comparable non-Energy Star buildings and a 3.6% higher occupancy rate. So that's pretty good in a market that's where these investors have very tight margins. Next slide. And in terms of benchmarking and disclosure, we have 7, now 8 jurisdictions. We can change that now. And because is it Philadelphia just went through? Okay. And so what we do is, this became important to cities because, just like we were talking earlier about New York, they wanted to get an inventory of how their buildings were performing and what type of ordinances they could put in place in order to help these buildings operate and be more efficient. So DC is also one of the cities that have ordinances that are using the Energy Star tools in order to meet the compliance for their disclosure. And then the other part is transparency, and then it's driven by data. Policymakers want to see data. They want to see numbers. They want to know what's going on. Just kind of anecdotal information was no longer good enough to make good, consistent policies that they can ask people to adhere to. Next slide. And so this is some of the recognition activity. This year at the American Institute of Architects, we always have a challenge for the architects, and then all of the projects that achieve the Energy Star, they're featured at the AIA in the gallery, and then we do a session. And these projects are, like Kelly was saying, they're big and smalls. And it's kind of like the complement to the 2030 the AIA is doing. They're collecting numbers, and then we kind of display this, because the same types of things we're asking that Kelly is looking at in the 2030, we're asking architects to actually do this, show us the project, and then we'll sponsor it or feature it in AIA, on EPA's website to show people that this can actually be done. And so we do the individual projects where she wraps them all up and puts them in a nice number. We've shown that our projects, I have over 400 of these projects that are applied for design to earn, and I have maybe about 20% of them have actually gone over to earn the actual label. And we were averaging, the last one I looked at, about a 49% energy reduction. So we were a little bit higher there, but still it shows that this can be done. And in one year we were almost at 50%. There was more than 50% energy reduction. So it varies over year, and it varies over the types of projects. And then wait a minute, go back. How many AIAers are in here? You guys recognize him? You guys recognize him? Don't you, Kelly? Anyone recognize him? That's R.K. Stewart. And he was president 3 years ago. Big proponent of CBECS. He was one of the people who've been very supportive of our programs and of CBECS, and also working with AIA to help architects understand how to use the targets and the numbers to help better inform their design process. And then just wrapping up, I think I've given all my bullets as I've gone along to talk about how these tools that we've developed are being they were developed to be non-biased, and it's so that they can be kind of market usable. So there's a lot of people who have picked up on Portfolio Manager and Target Finder, or either the outcomes from them, in order to use to be part of their process, so that we can all have this dialogue and using similar information and similar numbers. And then thanks to the work that Joelle has done, that's how we were able to get numbers in order to actually create the database, I think maybe about 10, 15 years ago. And then I'll leave, we've played a vital role in helping the industry move forward with reducing dependence on fossil fuel energy products and reducing the nation's carbon footprint. So with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Karen. Any questions for Karen?
when a building receives the Energy Star, is that also a snapshot in time?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so like in 10 years, if it degrades and it's taking more energy, it's still,
Well, the Energy Star has the label or the certification has a year on it. So if you get the Energy Star, it'll be 2011 or 2012. So that designates that building has the criteria for that year. People leave them up over time, but that's the year that it's actually at the snapshot.
and most building owners just have it for just the 1 year that they, or do they try to get it every year, or?
Well, we have a lot of partners to do multiple benchmarks over the year, because then they get to use that as a validation. So yes, they do redo it.
Question, introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Matt from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. It was my understanding that Energy Star is a voluntary program. Is it ever mandatory?
No, it's voluntary.
It is, okay.
Yeah,
That's what I
right.
thought. Thanks.
Yeah. But you know, what's kind of tricky, and maybe this is maybe what you're kind of getting to, is that when these states all of a sudden use our tools, say, to mandate a particular policy or particular disclosure. And I was actually talking to my boss about that a bit one day, and it's like, because people will all of a sudden may confuse and think that Energy Star is mandatory, but it's not us that's mandatory. They're just using our tools as a means to enact a particular policy or initiative.
So does this address multifamily residential?
This, I didn't talk about multifamily, but yes, we do have a multifamily specification, if you would, for designing and constructing multifamily. And so I didn't put it in there because I just had our homes and just did a big overview. But yes, we do have a program to address that. And if you need more information.
Our final panelist is Anthony Guma with CoStar.
I think I'll use the podium so I'm not craning too much. But for the audience here, I don't know, maybe I'll pause and say a few words about CoStar because I'm not too sure. Usually I deliver these things at more commercial, like real estate focused audiences with brokers and owners and whatnot. So just if it's redundant for the people who know, sorry. But long story short, CoStar is a large commercial real estate data and analytics company. We track the inventory of commercial real estate in the United States and the United Kingdom, and spaces for lease, spaces for sale, and aggregated analytics based on what the movements are in the market between spaces coming on and off the market. That's the real quick, high overview description of the company. And so with all of that, a long, multi-decade time series of information about what's going on in the properties, we can provide analytics that can answer questions at a whole depth of different levels. So, okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about what's gone on with green buildings in the market. What's the activity around green buildings generally? So this is a quick slide that shows just for office buildings, and the preface to all of these aggregated statistics on green building activity is always that the most difficult thing there is to separate reliably the green buildings versus the non-green buildings. So in these slides, it's going to be LEED certified properties or Energy Star labeled buildings versus non. But again, there's overlap in those two sets, and there's a lot of sort of correlation between those and newer, better buildings anyway. So to simplify things, most of these slides pertain to office buildings that are built after 2002 and 50,000 square feet or greater. So this just shows what's gone on in the market since 2006. Office building deliveries of that size and vintage versus LEED certified office deliveries on top of it. So the place of focus more or less is probably 2009, where overall construction activity started to slow, but it was also the largest, it was the year where there was the biggest jump between LEED certified deliveries and non. So even as the market was softening a little bit, there was the velocity of LEED certified buildings was growing, and then it tailed off a little bit as construction just slowed down as we got up through the end of 2011. So the question here is what's going to happen going forward? As construction activity picks up, are we going to see those diamond shapes start to go back up to the, hopefully we'll start to see those diamond shapes go back up to 2009 levels. Next. And so this is a look at office absorption for LEED certified properties exclusively. Absorption, just if this is net absorption. So there's gross absorption and net absorption. Gross absorption is just how much space has been leased in a particular metro. Net absorption is how much space has been leased versus how much has been vacated. So if it's positive, that means the market's doing good. If it's negative, it means it's doing bad. So what this is, so the blue line, that's the lead percentage of stock. So over time, that's grown as more lead buildings have been certified and come into the market. So, and above that, the green line, I think it's green, that's the lead's percentage of the overall absorption. So the way to read this is to say that that green line is directly in line with the preceding slide. That sort of run-up of lead certified spaces delivering into the market meant that some of this was going to get absorbed off the market. But the conclusion here is that while lead might be only of the spaces of the building stock in those years, it might be around, if we just looked at 2010, 24.3% of that size and vintage. It's absorbing more than its fair share of the market, so it's doing well. There's a lot of other activity going on at play here. Yes, that there was a lot of deliveries. There was a sort of high-end office buildings were a bit of a discount because of how many were in the market. So there's a lot of fundamentals at play as to why that's happening. But the point is there is the demand's there. So next. So that was just overall. So here's another. Sorry if this is a little bit a lot of stuff on there. But this is a related to slide from the one we just looked at, looking at a series of different markets. And on the y-axis is the percent of LEED certified buildings in each of those cities, or each of those markets, of the same subset that we've been looking for. And on the x-axis is LEED's percent of total net absorption between 2009 and 2011. So again, how to read it is, along that diagonal, if we just looked at Los Angeles, for instance, it's saying that of that subset of buildings, there's 44% of them are LEED certified, and the net absorption in those years has been about the same amount. So LEED's capturing about its fair share of the market.
So you're going from here to here.
Yes. So for instance, it's LEED buildings are capturing their fair share of market activity. But if you go over to the right, those are the properties that are capturing more than their fair share. So if you looked at, we'll say Charlotte or Denver, it's more LEED spaces, coming off the market than it's on a percentage basis than there is in the market. So those are the sort of greener cities, if you will. This is one way of trying to tease out where the demand for green buildings might be a little bit might be the strongest. No real surprises there with Portland in the end. And then at the same time, some of the markets that you might not expect to be there are often because maybe one large 1 million square foot building came on the market and came off rather quickly. So sometimes because this is on a square foot basis, there's some bigger buildings in smaller markets that always sort of swing the statistics one way or the other. So what next? Okay, and this is just a rank order of Energy Star on a percentage basis, total rentable square feet, just because we're local, highlight Washington a little bit. And to speak to the question that we heard just a moment ago, these are buildings that received an Energy Star label at any point in their history. So it's not just 2011 or 10 or whatever the case may be. It might be more relevant to sort of say current ones to give a kind of current snapshot of the market. So that's just where we rank in the usual suspects up at the top. Next. And same with top 20 LEED certified markets. A lot of overlap, if you will, but still, I guess the overall point is these numbers are relatively, to say 8 or 9% on a square footage, but that's pretty good in both cases, LEED and Energy Star. And then just to bring it home locally a little bit more, for just because we're here and we do things. This is, and we work in this city. This is a breakdown of the Washington D.C. submarkets for LEED certified buildings as a percentage of all LEED. This is the submarket's percentage of all LEED certified buildings in the Washington D.C. metro. So so then at the end we have basically downtown is leading the pack, and then it sort of trails off and it's pretty level going on. I guess the point that the additional bit of information that would be good to layer on top of this slide, but we can internalize it a little bit for the folks that work here, is that in those markets, those are the high demand markets for green buildings. So if you're working, if any of your clients or tenants are developing buildings that are catering to a particular set of tenants that's in these particular markets, then you probably need to be a green building. Next, this is the last one, so we still have time for some questions. And this is just looking at the 4 LEED certification levels since 2006. And the real shift that's going on there is there's a general trend towards the higher levels of certification. Gold's the sort of the new standard, if you will. Between the shift is pretty clear. It started around 2008 and sort of moved up through 2012. I felt like I had to. Platinum's kind of moved along the bottom there. I felt like I had to point out 2007, where there was which was kind of off the charts, if you will. It was just the Discovery headquarters kind of drove that entire bar, one smaller school, I think, in there. So this is what this means. Whether there's a lot of different theories, we could maybe talk about what this might mean. Whether is it just that green buildings have become a little bit cheaper to deliver? Is it just that there's been a large run-up in education between owners, investors, architects, the industry to sort of deliver these things a little bit quickly and more easily? Or is it it's just that we're demanding more sort of greener buildings? So yeah.
So these are all buildings, because you mentioned school.
Yeah,
and
this is
Discovery.
these
So
are
just
all
office.
buildings, yeah, not just office buildings.
All LEED buildings.
All LEED buildings, right. So, and if you looked at it, this is just Washington, D.C., but if you looked at it nationally, it basically looks exactly the same. And so I'll stop there. We've got a little bit of time for discussion and questions.
Yes, Anthony. Questions for Anthony?
Oh, sorry.
There's
Yes.
one for you, Anthony. Of all the actual built stock in
Okay.
the country, what part does this data of yours represent? What portion? 25%, 50%?
That's a good question, because the whole country, the denominator for the whole country is a bit of a difficult thing to. We have a paper on it I can send you, but within the CoStar database, we track for about over almost 4 million buildings, and so it's about it's almost 700,000 office buildings, about 1.2 million of it is retail. So it's a lot. We like to think that we capture the, that our representation of the inventory is well,
Over 50%.
Yeah, oh yeah, it should, at least over 50%. And in the mature markets, like in the DCs, Boston, San Francisco's, there probably isn't a building that we don't know about. But it's just in the smaller places, we're still, we'll get there.
I have a question for Anthony.
Oh yeah.
In your data, if I remember, you showed San Francisco up near the top of some of those, I think in LEED, maybe LEED in Energy Star.
Yes.
But yet on the chart that had the diagonal line, they were way over to the left, which is kind of counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive, and that's because San Francisco is still high on this axis. So these are correlated. So that the percentage of LEED certified buildings in San Francisco is high, but there hasn't been much activity in San Francisco, kind of at all. If you look at the overall market fundamentals, there hasn't been there's been almost new deliveries. The market's just been generally weak, and what activity there has been in a lot of the sort of smaller boutique, more kind of tech company spaces. So while there's a lot of the green building stock is quite good in San Francisco, there hasn't been that's just a function more of market fundamentals than green building dynamics. There just kind of hasn't been a lot going on in San Francisco.
So those were empty green buildings mostly in San Francisco? The absorption's only 3%, is that?
Well, it means that there hasn't been much movement. I mean, what's been going on, it's been positive over those 2 years, but that there hasn't been much new space coming on the market, and there hasn't been much new space coming off.
But it's-
So
Oh, I
it's
see.
static, so you don't know whether it's empty or occupied.
Well, yeah, because that absorption is different than vacancy. The overall, that's a different slide. The overall vacancy for, I mean, they were at kind of historic lows lately, and they're coming back. On average, for those kind of cities, it might be around 8%, but that's, whether that number stays static, the absorption number can move as it's going to move, but vacancy can stay level. or it could, or, as that absorption goes, vacancy starts to come down, but depending on what point the cycle.
So in the shift to where you see in 2009, there's a market shift to more gold certifications.
Okay. Yeah.
Does the 2009 revision in LEED have anything to do with that, or what is driving that major shift?
Well, we can speculate about that. I don't think it has to do with LEED 2009 because you would have seen, and I'm sure that the room can talk about this about more. You would have seen that certification year. So chances are, if it was certified in 2009, it was from one of the preceding. It was from LEED 2.2. Sure. But so the LEED 2009 certifications are coming in there. That's just the. What's moving it? There's a series of different, and we can hypotheses. I'd love to hear any more. Whether it is just overall demand for greener buildings, maybe they as the product industry is sort of caught up to speed. We like to think that that it's getting cheaper to deliver and build a green building. Whether just sort of knowledge. I mean, these are things that we can segue into the.
These numbers correlate to new construction more than existing, right? Especially in 2009, 2010?
Those would, yeah. That should have, it's another slide that we can, that's around the same, the inflection point's about the same between new construction and existing buildings. If we had a similar graph that just looked at LEED NC versus LEED NB, LEED EP, you'd see a kind of similar shape, and that's true. But whether it's what's kind of driving the shift towards greener buildings, there's probably a whole series of reasons.
Well, has the experience of people in the audience been that 2008, 2009, 2010, the market reached a point where it's really asking for LEED Gold? Is that a driver here?
Well, so are you saying that EB as well as NC are both in here?
This is all rating systems, correct?
Yeah. I mean, my sense is EB is easier to get gold than NC.
Well, yeah. So that would correlate with if that's the case, then that would make sense because there's more activity, there's more EB certifications and NC certifications in 2011 and 2012. So. Right. But I'll let the architects debate what's easier to achieve or not.
Well, we have a couple minutes for questions. I wanted to ask one question to bring it back to CBECS. I think it exists as sort of an acronym for a lot of people. We're doing some work in China, which is very interested in efficiency because it doesn't want to be beholden to Russia for all of its energy as its population grows and as it constructs all these new buildings. There is no CBECS in China, and I don't think there will be anytime soon. And it's such a limiting factor in what the central government and what groups can do to look at efficiency in buildings there. So I think we take it for granted a little bit that we do have a national unbiased data source like this. But I wanted to ask Kelly and Karen, both of these programs, the commitment and certainly Energy Star, a lot of the things you're doing with data in those programs, the engine is really, or the basis is CBECS. So if CBECS can increase its sample size, by 50% to almost 10,000 buildings, if it can begin to really look at occupancy uses, really get good numbers on data centers, on TV studios, high energy uses, what does that do for your two programs?
Well, I mean, I can speak just briefly to mine. I mean, I think if there is sort of one consistent complaint is not the most accurate word, but as firms are going through the 2030 commitment and trying to report on their projects, they're just realizing what a huge discrepancy there can be in a project type if they go with the national average versus getting a regionalized average, and how can we actually start to compare these buildings or understanding where it is. And so I think as we start to get a larger sample size, as we can get a better sense, if we can get more data and help shrink that gap. And I think what was also really eye-opening as well is as we were meeting to talk about this is if you dig into the data, how valuable it can be. Sometimes it's not the easiest to find. There's a great deal of data within CBECS, but it can be harder to find. And I actually met with one person who came to actually talk about it. And has his mechanical engineer sort of go through all the various building types that are in CBECS and not just show what their EUI is, but how that building uses its energy. What is the number one cause of what's the number one stress on load for each building type? And that helps him communicate to his client, helps him as he's going through the design process of, if we attack this area first, this is going to give us, you know, the biggest bang for our buck. So I think even some of it is not just getting more of the data, but making it easier to find and easier to use to inform from our standpoint the design process.
Karen?
Thoughts?
I think you should ask them. I think you should ask the
Yeah.
audience what they think.
Question?
I'm not trying to get over the question, but we want to hear from you guys because it helps us develop.
Please introduce yourself. Alan Asserson, Asserson Architects. Peter White and I worked at the AIA 25 years ago doing the energy professional development programs and we worked with something called BEPS and a whole bunch of other things. So I have a long familiarity with the progress of metrics and their flawed nature as well as the good ones. And I think you brought it up. I mean, it's honestly, there are so many microclimatic and site and specifically site-specific limitations where the potential of one site, even within a region, is so much greater than another in terms of what you can actually do. And then programmatically, how the building uses are done. You could try to create enough bins, you put all that data in there. But I'm not saying, the CBECS to me is very important and as something that you're trying to establish data and things. But people have to be wary, and I want people to just kind of comment on this in general. And I'm especially leery, though, about LEED being used as a metric, and whether it's gold or something like that, because the criteria that LEED uses in the actual documentation on whether it achieves the levels of performance that it's, proclaiming, especially platinum buildings, can be really suspect. Personally, I think people who are grounded in understanding how important it is to deal with site-specific issues, the program, and all of the kind of general concepts for daylighting, the envelope design, and all these things are much better guided by their education and those things than trying to follow a color by numbers solution, which is totally metric based. And I'm interested in what your feelings are about that. I'm not discrediting what you're doing, it's just I have those concerns.
Actually, I have a comment to what you're saying. And I think the future of where we go with this, where we could have, because I think metrics sometimes sets up too much of a clinical atmosphere for designers to do their jobs. Since I came from an architecture background, I understand a bit about what goes on. And I see things like the building information modeling, where you have a bit more interaction and you have more granularity, because there are some that actually uses, in the Green Building Studio, their climate data, they were able to get it down, they had something like 9,000 points where they kind of modeled these various microclimates. But anyway, but to get a sense of, as you're making decisions about your design, you're beginning to see if you have mechanical equipment in there or whatever you have, you're getting feedback as to how this is affecting energy in your design, and also when you start looking at adding the humans to it and what they're doing, you get to really see. So if you want to go to, because I really think that when you look at LEED and code, you cannot do a passive system and compare it to a non-passive system. So that is problematic if we're going to get to that 60% number, that climate reduction and energy number. So I think that we need to take metrics as for what they are. They're guides, they're numbers, they're ways to get us from out here to say here. Then we use our intellectual capability of what we've learned and what we know just by doing what we do, and then you begin to bring it down and you use those to kind of trade off and use it to make decisions. When we created the numbers for the target finder and the benchmarking tool, that's why we kind of normalized it, and that's why we did it to zip code, so we could look at heating degree days, cooling degree days, overlays, as opposed to just taking the raw CBECS. We did something to the numbers. So it's not perfect, but it's something to kind of get you there, so you can kind of at least have a dialogue and a conversation to help you to make better decisions. That's what they're for. They're not there. You should be driving the numbers, not the numbers driving.
I agree, and the profession, though, has kind of lost its leadership because this is codified now. Okay, these numbers are targets that we must meet. And I think in many cases, the targets are arbitrary because they don't take into consideration very important issues dealing with the site. And you can apply for special,
Arrows do
consideration.
take that into consideration.
Right, and I think that's good. I mean, I've done work with Energy Star, I think it's
Yeah,
great.
I mean, it's not perfect, but, and then I would always like to say, it's like, okay, use LEED as the platform and look at ways you can get there, and then measure using something more specific, because code is not a good indicator of setting targets and of performance. Code is to look at trade-offs in equipment, and then I think when we took it and tried to come up with a way to look at LEED, and LEED NC specifically, because I sat in on that committee when they did that, they didn't have anything else, and it just stayed there. And now it needs to evolve itself where it becomes more sophisticated so that designers can do their jobs and not be at the mercy of some mechanical equipment. Because I just think that's I'm being recorded on it. But I mean, I just think that the two of them really need to play off together. Like on a day like today, yes, we do want air conditioning. It feels pretty good. But it should not be the driver. It should be part of how we do design. So
Well, I think that feeds into really what we want to try and answer on this. Kelly, you said 86% increase in participation in the commitment, average about 35% reduction. But the number of projects that are hitting, this 60% goal is still relatively small. So what needs to happen to, really rise that percentage? And, people have thoughts.
I would definitely, I would probably put it back. I'm sure that there's more than, a couple of firms that are in the room that have undertaken it. I would only be sharing, what I've heard from some of the firms. And I think I think there are a lot of, stressors. It's different. It's one thing when you're tackling an individual building. And I think that's the difference between talking about what we're capable of doing with one building versus the real world impacts of running an entire design portfolio with varying clients, with varying economic conditions, whatever it is. And I think that it was sort of taking that broad scope, that it's a little bit more difficult to put those targets in and address them on every single project that a firm touches. But I think there are people in the room that they could probably speak to or give their sense of what the difficulties would be with that.
Yeah.
Sure. Again, Jason Casper with CGF Architects. We're one of the firms that have signed up for the AIA 2030 commitment, and we're very much behind the 2030 challenge. We have a lot of clients, however, which are very high energy intensity clients. We have a lot of hospitals, we have a lot of research labs, which for them, meeting energy goals is, especially anything in the range of 60% is crazy, because we're struggling to meet things in the 10 to 12 to even 15% range with those types of clients. And so what we've had to do in terms of addressing the 2030 challenge with those clients, which again is something that we feel very strongly about, is that we have to temper it in a way that is still accessible to them. Because if we went in there and said, our goal is to make you 60% and more energy efficient than code, we'd get laughed out of the building, and credibility is not there. So the nice thing that the AIA 2030 commitment has brought to the table is that it's all about education and measurement and trying to assess where your overall portfolio as a firm is in terms of energy consumption. And so it's more about the understanding and measuring and the benchmarking, and that is something that we see our clients see the value in and can get behind, regardless of whether or not the actual goal, 60%, is maybe like way outside of their ability to meet. They still see the value in the commitment.
That's where we've seen the success in Energy Star, the partnership, is that they got on the benchmark, they put their energy bills in, they go and manipulate and figure out what it is that they need to do in order to bring those bills down. Because when they see that they're using X amount of energy, then they go and get the O&M staff to make some adjustments, and then they see that drop from 52 kBTU per square foot, or whatever their total energy number. They see that drop of 10% just from taking low-hanging fruit They begin to figure that out on their own. And when they can figure that by being better prepared and better maintaining their buildings, they can get these savings. And then when they begin to go look at upgrades and other things they can do and see those savings, then that all of a sudden translates into their bottom line. And I think that's been the piece that's been such a success of the program. We don't tell them you have to get an Energy Star. It started out as a benchmarking tool, like you were saying, where they go in and they assess their performance. And then they make decisions on that, and then they make those changes. Let me ask you, for those clients, when you say to them, you know, they can't get the 60%, but when you talk to them about, say, benchmarking and looking at the energy use, is that something they're interested in? When you approach them to say, if we do X, you can look at a potential savings of Y. Are they interested in that?
Absolutely, because a lot of these same users have very high utility bills, both in terms of energy and water consumption. So when you're talking their language about monthly savings, annual savings on their operating budget, they're going to listen.
Question over here?
Yeah. Have you considered, and this is sort of difficult, but advocacy for, does the AIA do advocacy for trying to create incentives, tax incentives? So for instance, I mean, it seems to me you would get greater participation from the private sector if there was some sort of incentive to participate. For instance, the federal government and the state of Maryland and even some counties have incentive programs to have people install photovoltaics or on their roofs. So a few years ago, there was a lot of my friends were participating in that and trying to get, you know, photovoltaics on their roof. But then that sort of got taken away. It seems to me that the AIA could try to incentivize.
Well, I mean, we have a really robust, advocacy department, and we certainly, I'm not the best to speak to it, but certainly from a federal level and a state level, yes, we have a number of advocacy issues aimed at incentives. We've done, one of the resources we have on our website now for the last, I guess we've had four issues now, local leaders and sustainability, where our local and state advocacy department, we have a federal, state and local branch of our advocacy department, and it looks at those very things. It takes a scope of what jurisdictions across the U.S. are doing as far as what their most successful incentives are, how you can mirror them in your own town. So yes, we certainly advocate it. Incentives are, it's always better when you can incentivize something rather than necessarily demand it and regulate it. So yes, but it ultimately comes down to, we can advocate for it, but it comes down to what the jurisdictions do.
We're trying to work with some of the utilities to use the kind of the protocol that we use for rating for the design buildings. Because I know in the other side, the DSM side, it was also a lot of money's going out with that. But on the design side, it's still kind of, for lack of a better word, it's kind of difficult to figure who has them, how you do them, because Con Ed has one, and then Delmarva Energy has one. So that's one of the things we're going to look at to see if we can bring better connection between the design community and then those utility offerings for their new design programs. So that's one of the things on my list for this year.
Last question, then we'll wrap up.
Okay, great. Well, what a time to wrap up. My name is Dan Wang. I work for IBC Engineering Services. I also co-chair the Architecture 2030 committee here with the IADC. So thank you so much for expanding the conversation. I just wanted to, maybe this is a good closing thought about the 2030 commitment as well as the 2030 challenge. And I think really a huge part of it is just getting the conversation organized to comment, just to go back to the metrics, to a common metric, so that we are talking about energy use in buildings and how does that relate back to this huge challenge of global climate change. And not every building should not be designed to be zero energy. They're there for a function, and that function is driven by program, and it's driven by economics. That's why there's so many big buildings like this that take up whole blocks, because when they discovered mechanical refrigeration, it made sense economically to light all the interior. You didn't have to, do a lot of what we now talk about is, passive solar design elements like high windows and, natural ventilation and things like that. Just, on this 60% reduction goal, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to get your EUI down 60% below the regional average. I think a 60%, it's trying to decouple the energy from the carbon. So you can still do, off-site renewable energy purchases to get off to 20% and then do on-site generation. Obviously, we have a long way to go with that. But I have so many questions. There's like survey methodology, but I'm just going to annoy you after the panel. But really, I guess at the end of the day, these systems are imperfect, and I would just suggest that just really putting ourselves in any kind of context to know where we, like a snapshot in time and a goal to where we're going, and that our process feeds back into where we're coming from and how far we still have to go, that's helpful. And getting clients to understand that and getting the general public to understand that, I think is just, if we can get that done, then we'll take on the next one, because we got a long way to go. But if we're talking past each other, we're never even going to get out the door. So that was more of an opinion in the form of a question, but
I think that was an opinion in the form of an opinion. Thanks, Dan. Michael, did you have anything you wanted to say?
No, I think obviously as we have the celebration at the U.S. Botanic Garden, which is just a couple blocks away, and everyone we'd like to see come over there. I think there's some food and drinks, and we can continue this conversation.
Let's give a hand to our panelists. Thank you.